On the island of Sicily, a Greek-settled city known as Syracuse flourished under the rule of tyrant King Dionysius II. Despite being a wealthy and powerful man, the king was perpetually worried, and his grave demeanor was permanent. But there was a man in his court named Damocles, a friend of the king. He said he couldn't understand why the king was always sulking, when in fact he should be the happiest man on earth. The king grew impatient with Damocles, who continually repeated how wonderful the king's life was, that he had everything at his disposal. Women, wealth, nothing was out of his reach, he would say. But the king, exhausted by such tirades from his friend, decided that they would switch places for a day, so that Damocles could feel the weight of wearing the crown. Damocles was thrilled. This would surely be the happiest day of his life. He would reign over Syracuse for a whole day, while the king had a day off. But there was a catch. Damocles was to remain seated on the throne all day, and upon him would be a sword, dangling from a single horsehair thread. A huge table with a lavish banquet was laid in front of the king. There were treats and exquisite delicacies. But Damocles had not much of an appetite, as he was worried about the sword on his head. Gorgeous exotic dancers danced in front of him, but he only had eyes for the sword hanging over his head. That's when the wind blew. At this point, Damocles decided to get up from his throne, as he was sure that the sword would fall, but he was stopped by his royal advisors. Although surrounded by all the pleasantries and luxury, the acting king had eyes for only one thing: the sword above his head. With the dawn of a new day, King Dionysius returned to reclaim his throne. Damocles threw himself at the king's feet and hugged his knees, telling him that he had never missed his friend so much. The king inquired how his day as king had been. Damocles replied that it was one of his worst experiences in life. That fearsome sword over his head was driving him mad. The king explained to his friend that whenever a king is crowned, an invisible sword is placed over his head, which may fall at any moment. Power brings with it countless enemies. Rival kingdoms may crave your land, wealth may attract pirates and thieves, and even the people closest to you, such as friends and relatives, may desire and plot to take your place. Damocles understood how heavy the crown is, and never again wished to sit, even for a day, on the throne upon which the sword hung, for it could fall at any moment. All of us believe ourselves to be righteous, good, and ethical. But would we really stay that way if we were given exceptional means of power? In ancient Greece, where gods and heroes were not foreign to day-to-day life, there lived a humble shepherd named Gyges, bound by the wills and whims of the ruling powers. However, fate had unique plans for this average man, leading him to a breakthrough that would not only change his life, but also serve as the foundation for one of the most important philosophical debates on morality and ethics. Get yourself ready to join a world where the power of invisibility challenges the true nature of justice and human character. Gyges was guiding his flock as he always did. Then a great storm, together with an earthquake, tore a mysterious crack in the ground, revealing a secret passage that caught his attention. Moved by curiosity, Gyges went down into the fissure. Down there, amongst the shadows and the echo of his own footsteps, he found something remarkable: the tomb of a giant, with nothing less than a magic ring on his finger. This was not an ordinary gem. It was an artifact from another world, wrought with an out-of-this-world skill and artistry. Hesitantly, but propelled by a force greater than reason, Gyges pulled the ring off the colossal finger and fitted it on his own. As he adjusted it, he found its tremendous power, the ability to become invisible at will. The power of the ring gave Gyges a world of possibilities. Confused and awed by his new ability at first, he quickly began to explore its potential. The ring not only rendered him invisible to other people, it gave him a freedom he had never imagined, one that would challenge the limits of his morality and character. The discovery of the ring led to a radical transformation in Gygas's life. Initially, he used the power of invisibility for minor benefits and harmless ruses. Eventually, the ring's sheer power seduced him, sparking in him aspirations and ambitions that he had never before felt in him. Gygas came to realize that, under the cloak of invisibility, he could behave consequence-free, without judgment, unencumbered by the chains of morality ruling human conduct. As time passed, Gygas's actions grew bolder and darker. He used the power of his ring to sneak into the palace, spying on state secrets and scheming intrigues. In an unprecedented display of temerity, Gygas seduced the queen, conspired against the king, and finally took the throne. The humble shepherd turned into a powerful monarch. But at what cost? Stealth had given him everything a man could wish for, but at the same time, it had robbed him of something essential to his being. With the ring, Gygas had experienced the taste of absolute power, and this power revealed his true nature. He was no longer an ordinary man, bound by laws and morality. He had become a being beyond any human judgment, one who could act without any fear of the ramifications of his actions. Rising to the throne through manipulation and betrayal, he ruled with the same cunning and deception that he had employed to come to power. But the weight of his actions started to weigh on him. Gygas faced unforeseen challenges as king. His rule was marred by mistrust and fear, both on his part and that of his subjects. He knew that others could claim the throne in the same cunning way that he himself had done. The irony of his fate was abundantly clear. Absolute power had given him the kingdom but robbed him of peace. He lived haunted by paranoia and isolation, incapable of trusting anyone since he knew what a person could do when unburdened by moral constraints and repercussions. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. In this allegory, the philosopher Plato prompts us to reflect on what really guides us, our inner convictions or the fear of external consequences. If released from social and moral constraints, how would we act? With his ring, Gygas embodies this total freedom, but he also depicts the human tendency to yield to corruption when there are no apparent risks or impending judgments. Plato, throughout this allegory, contends that justice and morality should not depend on the possibility of being found out or punished, but on a deep internal understanding of what is right. What would we do if we could act without being seen or judged? Answering this question still defies human conscience and morality, challenging each one of us to examine our values and principles and whether they can withstand the lure of power. In one of his most famous lessons, the Greek philosopher Plato told the story of men who lived in a cave. But their life was not ordinary. Inside the cave, several men lived chained to a wall. They were not criminals, but they were bound from their earliest childhood. These men were bound by shackles on their feet, and their heads were tied by a chain around their necks. Therefore, they could only see what was in front of them. They couldn't even look at each other. And all they could see in front of them was the bottom of the cave, illuminated by a light that was behind the wall. On the other side was a flame in a high place, which illuminated the space. There was also a bridge by the wall, where men passed carrying objects and puppets at the height of the wall. These objects cast a shadow at the bottom of the wall. These shadows were all that the prisoners knew of the world. The prisoners discussed the objects, giving them names and purposes. Sometimes the men carrying the objects would talk among themselves. And the prisoners, listening to the echo of the cave, believed that it was the shadows who spoke. But one day, one of these prisoners broke free. For this newly freed man, seeing the shape of the other prisoners for the first time made him very confused. He jumped over the wall, and on the other side, he could see the flame that illuminated the bottom of the cave. This man believed he had finally seen the sun, the element that allowed his whole world to exist. This man, as he began to see things he had never dreamed existed, came to doubt himself, thinking he might be crazy. The prisoner, seeing the flame up close, felt his eyes burn, but began to be fascinated by the light. This man noticed that at the exit of the cave, there was an even more fascinating light coming through the crack. He decided to look for the source of that light and leave the cave, but the way out was not easy. It was necessary to climb a steep slope to the surface. His muscles, atrophied by the imprisonment, made it more difficult. Finally, he reached the outside of the cave, and the strong midday light blinded his sight, which was only used to darkness. He felt desperate as he thought he had gone blind. But after rubbing his eyes, the uneasiness seemed to subside. Still with blurred vision, he was a stranger to all the new reality that lay before him. He felt safer looking at the shadows, as these were more familiar to him. But as his vision adapted to the new conditions, the man began to better understand the world around him. The remnants of objects were not what he had previously imagined. He realized that the sun was the true source of all light, and that the world in which he lived was pure illusion. This man began to live in harmony with this new reality. His past in the cave seemed to be behind him. But as he passed in front of the cave again, he remembered his colleagues, with whom he had spent most of his life. The others were still trapped, believing that the shadow world was all there was. The former prisoner decided to return to the cave and reveal all the lies of their lives and rescue them, leading them into the light. He placed himself between the men and the cave wall, but his colleagues did not recognize him. They knew that the man who had come out was one of the best shadow experts there was, so they challenged him to identify the images that emerged. What had once seemed easy had become almost impossible. His vision was no longer used to the darkness. He decided to tell his colleagues everything he had observed outside and his experiences. But the prisoners concluded that that light was only a source of blindness and madness. But the freed man did not give up on his colleagues and tried to break their chains. However, the prisoners seemed determined to remain in the world of shadows. For them, that was the only truth that existed. And so they were willing to defend even the chains that imprisoned them